Dinner with them last night, Dan and Mary Murray.
It's like a one-way system. We're throwing 6, 7, 10, and 11, 12. But it says the building is shaped like its letter T, comprises of a rectangle of 74 foot by 27. Halfway along is an addition at right angles to it, 23 foot wide and 22 foot long. This rear annex is itself extended by an 18 foot square building against its gable wall. The elongated annex forming the downstairs of the downstroke of the letter T, and that of course was the priest's dwelling when the church was originally built. On 11th of April 1835, a complete survey of Tullyallen was conducted for the first valuation. It was then measured 74 foot 6 by 27 foot 6 by 14 feet. In addition to the above, a dwelling place length 22 foot by 23 foot by 7 foot high, house of the Reverend Hugh McChrystal. These dimensions in 1835 correspond with the building as it stood in 1883, when it was relocated to here. Once the building was cleaned of pebble dash and plaster, it became evident that the 1830 rebuild was not so much a demolition as an extension to the 1768 building, which lay mainly intact within the 1830 structure. The rebuild consisted of replacing the front wall, this one. Replacing those stones had been incorporated in the 1830 replacement. The rest of the building, with minor modifications, is as it was in 1768. The original blocked up entrance door and windows became obvious in the early stages of cleaning the stonework. The available evidence suggests the following history of the chapel. The smaller T-form structure, which we now know as Tullyallen Mass House, was built in 1768. The date may be significant for several local and national reasons. In the broader perspective, relations between the Roman Catholic Church and the monarch had improved during the 18th century. In 1745, the Irish Parliament had permitted mass houses to be erected and so recognised the practice of Catholic worship once more. The Irish link, June 1992, that's taken from that. In 1767's Catholic first prayed for the monarch, recognising the Hanoverian rather than the Stuart dynasty. That's important to anybody who's really bleeding in on the royal family, because as we all know, the Stuarts were Jacobites and that's followers of James II. So at this stage, when this church was built, the Hanoverian dynasty were on the throne in London. The chapel in 1768 was recorded during a survey of Tullyallen by Robert Livingstone in August 1769. He was commissioned by the Earl of Charlemont. He was probably preparing the property for sale to Burgess. That's Park and Ore, and if you're familiar with Park and Ore. And from that stylized drawing of Livingstone, the shape of the T-shape of the building is clear, as is the description of the surrounding area. The tenant was Arthur McGuinness on this lately built a Roman Catholic chapel, a good house. On April 1770, however, the caretaker tenant gave way to a Charles MacDonald, gent of Drumnafern, who obtained a 31-year lease on the chapel and its garden from the Honourable Francis Caulfield, who represented James, Earl of Charlemont, the owner of Tullyallen. The Charles MacDonald lease on the chapel was granted first in November 1769 and for renewal in November 1800. The first priest was probably the Reverend McCarran from Ahaloo, resident of Killishel in 1766. There is some suggestion that the land was set aside for the Catholic community prior to 1768 by a prosperous tenant, Alex Ramsay, who was reputedly a friend of the local priest. From that evidence, the Mass House site would appear to have been abstracted from the land to the south and west, which was the Ramsay farm in 1768. The next reference to the chapel is from 1792, when the landlord John Henry Burgess undertook a major tree planting programme commencing with the Eden Crannan and Tullyallen forts or rafts, and the chapel yard and the priest's farm in Eden Crannan. By 1802, 27,000 trees had been planted on the Park and Ore estate, including Tullyallen, and 91,000 quicks. Burgess employed the local curate as his agent, religion unspecified. The priest's farm in adjacent Eden Crannan is known in local lore and may have been for some time a form of living, or may have been simply a rented property but the first valuation map of 1830 highlights several plantations and planted boundaries in the area, most probably the Raths of Eden Crannan and Tullyalan and the Chapel Yard and some farms in Eden Crannan. Relations between the Tullyalan Catholic parish and the landlord must have been equable in the 18th century because, as Corish points out, what decided between a mass house and a mass rock was normally the attitude of the landlord. By 1798, the survey of the Tullyalan sector of the Burgess estate noted Tullyalan Old Roman Catholic Chapel Mass House disgranted forever, but royalties reserved. I should also tell you that in 1798, the rebellion was the year of the rebellion in Ireland, and this gentleman, MacDonald, who became the name on the lease, in actual fact offered Lord Charlemagne, really the top aristocrat in the area, 200 Catholic men to defend the Union, which is ironic if you think about that, because it was mainly Presbyterians who were rebelling against the Union and Catholics who were actually in favour of the Union. So history isn't always the way you think it is. With the failure of the United Irish Movement and the division between Presbyterians and Roman Catholics, there was a hardening of official attitudes towards an ever-growing pressure for Catholic emancipation, which was the vote. The first quarter of the century was turbulent, with Protestants ever aware of the growing pressure upon land created by a population explosion in the parish between 1780 and 1842. In that period, the Roman Catholic congregation trebled. It's phenomenal. You know. There were several faction fights which were standard for the time, mostly of a sectarian nature, and that was highlighted in 1824 when a group of Orangemen from the Castle Caulfield area and a group of defenders decided they would have a slug out at Tullyalan Bridge, which never really materialised. With the removal of the penal laws and the vote in 1829, obviously that was the signal to extend the chapel because the population had trebled and therefore the need was greater to expand it. And most of the people who are, I suggest, 40 or older will remember the old hall, and that's basically what it ended up, that size of building. Don't think there's anything else really to tell you about it. I think that more or less takes care of it. What I would like is Father Crowley here, who was our parish priest in Tullyalan in 1993 when this was taken down. He would lead you through how actually it was dismantled and relocated. Can you just tell me what this Ulster American folk park, Father, how the approach came, or what?
Well, what happened was that, as you know, the chapel became a hall at one stage, and then it kind of fell into disuse. It wasn't being used very much, and the windows were broken, and it was very badly kept and unkept. And the obvious solution was to demolish it. But you couldn't very well do that because there would have been a lot of objections in the parish. But somebody even suggested that it should be made into an old people's home. Imagine looking out through the windows. Dr. Mowat, who is in charge of all this here in Parkinor, or in the folk park, he rang me up and he said, "I believe you have an old famine chapel," and I said yes. And he said, "Would you think of gifting it to the folk park?" I said I would be totally delighted because it solved my problem to get rid of this eyesore from the parish, and to have it associated with the folk park and bringing out all the old history. So that's what happened, and Philip came over and they took it down stone by stone and named every stone and rebuilt it here. So it was just a very fortuitous thing as far as I was concerned, and a marvellous piece of historical research as well.